Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on our journey, our discussion through the box set released by the Criterion Collection earlier this year of 2020, which is the complete films of Agnès Varda. And today I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on that disc, the Blu-ray disc included in such set, which is called Program 9. And the title given to such Program 9 is Jane B. So this is Program 9, Jane B, or in English, Jane B. And Jane B, or Jane B, refers to Jane Birkin. And there were a number of films that Agnès Varda made that were focusing on, or that otherwise starred, Jane Birkin, or that had the involvement of Jane Birkin. And those films are included as part of the selection or collection of films that we have on this Program 9 disc. So the first film is Jane B par Agnès V, and this is from 1988. And then the second film is Kung Fu Master, which is also described as being from 1988. So Jane B par Agnès V and Kung Fu Master, both of which feature Jane Birkin in very key, crucial roles. The first film, which is Jane B par Agnès V, is a very fascinating type of film because it can be described perhaps to be a cinematic portrait created by Agnès Varda, whose subject matter is the personage and person and individual that we know and that Agnès Varda knows as Jane Birkin. So we get these very interestingly set up dialogues between Jane Birkin and Agnès Varda, as shown on screen, or Jane Birkin vis-a-vis the camera, thus she is talking to the camera or to us. Or we get instances where Jane Birkin is acting out various cinematic roles, role-playing as it were, which is an interesting use of the idea of cinematic fiction as a way employed to highlight or illuminate something about the real-life nature of a given individual or person, here being Jane Birkin. So the application or use of these sorts of role plays as we see depicted on screen. Also, we see the adaptation or application of art, and we understand Agnès Varda's love and admiration for various types of works of art, and we see interesting recreations of paintings or other works of art and incorporating Jane Birkin into these backgrounds or into these details. And we also get very intimate portraits and conversations with Jane Birkin. And in the process, I think we learn a lot about Jane Birkin and about who she is, what her concerns are, her family, and her children. And also there is some indications about her and Serge Gainsbourg as well, and her musical career and her career as a performer on stage, as well as an actor and also as a human being, because we get these wonderful moments where Jane Birkin is talking to us and trying to let us know, indeed through the camera eye of Agnès Varda, trying to let us know something about who she is. Now, in this way, or in these ways, I would suggest that this film, Jane B par Agnès V, is very much so wonderfully quintessential Varda, in the sense that it seems like Varda is using the applications and modes of of cinematic poetry or narrative fiction in cinema, through role-playing, through the application of recreations of art, etc., and even in the staging of various situations and the use of the self-reflexivity of Agnès Varda's camera, etc. These are ways in which Varda is pointing the lens or light to the fact that these are things of cinematic narrative fiction. But they are being applied in a way to, we understand, try to get at some kind of truth or understanding vis-a-vis the personage and the personality and the individualism and exactly who Jane Birkin is. And so this is an interesting paradoxical juxtaposition that is applied so forcefully and so effectively in all of Varda's work, including this film, namely the use of fiction and truth, and the combination of those different blends and styles in a given work by Agnès Varda. And I think we get that here in very healthy doses, as well as getting a great portraiture of a fascinating subject that is Jane Birkin herself. So in that way, we get and also just to continue on with that, we also get a lot of Agnès Varda's concerns as expressed through this cinematic portrait of Jane Birkin, namely the focus on the intimate and the individual, the importance of family, how Jane Birkin feels as an actor, but also and as a performer, as an artist, also as a woman in these modern times, and the implications of that, and vis-a-vis her relationships with her close inner circle, in particular her family. And these are conversations and discussions and concerns that we have seen applied very effectively in past Agnès Varda films, excuse me. And so this is also a really nice, consistent continuity, if you will, between the films that we have seen thus far from Varda and now. And so this is a very consistent, wholly consistent work in the realm of the world of Varda's filmography. And in that sense, too, this film, I think, can be said to be a portrait of Jane Birkin, but also an indication of who Varda is, just as with her other past films that we have seen. So this film is, again, it can be said to be an extension of Varda, who she is, why she is concerned with the things that she ends up focusing on in this film, and how she tackles or approaches those concerns in a cinematic medium. This is fascinating stuff. And again, when we have someone as fascinating as Jane Birkin at the center of this, you're in for a really nice treat indeed. So this is a wonderful cinematic portrait, which is called Jane B par Agnès V. And the supplements that are included with this particular film, as it's included here on Program 9, are, for example, or first, an introduction from Agnès Varda herself from 2012. This is a brief introduction, approximately 1 to 2 minutes, but as with all of her past intros that we have seen included in this set thus far, this one is absolutely essential and splendid. It is going into details about how they met, what were the circumstances that gave rise to wanting to make this project in the first place, the working relationship, and also the personal relationship between Varda and Jane Birkin. And these details come out very, very casually and very delicately, and also in that wonderful way that Varda speaks. So charming, so lovely. And so filled with information. So another essential intro from Varda with respect to this film, Jane B par Agnès V. Next, we have a one-on-one interview with Jane Birkin herself, and this is from 2020. It is called Agnès V by Jane B. And this is, of course, a reference to or a twist on the title of the film itself. And this is approximately 15 minutes. And Jane Birkin speaks in the wonderful way that she speaks. There's this lovely, intimate quality about the tone of her voice and how she is so careful and so detailed with what it is she's saying, and there is a warmth to the comments as well, and it comes out so clearly and so beautifully, in particular when she's speaking about her working and personal relationships with Agnès Varda, and she provides some lovely anecdotes about Agnès Varda and film festivals and her love of film, and also her concerns for Jane Birkin when certain family circumstances arose in Jane Birkin's life. And she spoke about how Agnès Varda was always providing support to her, as well as working with her on these films. So these are examples of why I think this is a great interview to have Jane Birkin. It's so lovely to see her and being interviewed about this, and to get her perspective. We get an indication of who she is and also how she viewed Agnès Varda. And so we get so much in this wonderful interview, again with Jane Birkin, approximately 15 minutes. And then to round out the supplements on the portion of the disc referring to J'aime B par Agnès V, we also get a trailer. And the trailer is actually, to be more specific, if you look at the trailer, it's in fact a trailer for both films, this film and Kung Fu Master. So it's you get two for the price of one, in a manner of speaking. So, but it is, of course, also related to J'aime B par Agnès V, and it's a very interesting trailer. So please check it out if you can. The next film on program 9 is called, in English, Kung Fu Master, in French, Le Petit Amour. And this is from 1988. It stars Jane Birkin and also Mathieu Demy, so the son of Agnès Varda. And also it features the real-life children of, or Charlotte Gainsbourg, who's the real-life daughter of Jane Birkin herself. And they play characters in this story. So they don't play themselves in a direct manner of speaking, but they play characters in this story. Now, the story is described in brief by Jane Birkin and discussed between Jane Birkin and Agnès Varda in the preceding film, J'aime B par Agnès V. And we get there a little bit of the genesis, how Jane Birkin came up with this idea, and they discuss, the two of them discuss the possibility of making it into a film. And this is what we have, Kung Fu Master, or Le Petit Amour. The film is in essence about an older woman who has herself a family of her children and also her own relatives, but she begins to get these feelings of attraction and emotional attraction towards this young boy played by Mathieu Demy. And so we get this very challenging and admittedly uncomfortable story involving this particular relationship. But this is not the only relationship, because we also get glimpses into the mother-daughter dynamic and their own relationship, and also how the Jane Birkin character, Mary Jane, how she reacts and responds to the various people around her, etc. But of course, at the heart of the story, in terms of the plot, we have this depiction of this relationship between this young boy and this older woman. So in those terms, of course, I think it can be said to be very challenging, very perhaps uncomfortable, quite disturbing in many aspects, quite obviously so. And so this is a film that I think might not be for everyone. And people who might react to it negatively, I think, do so in a reasonable manner because of the subject matter of the plot. It is a very uncomfortable plot, very much so. And for me, too, I admit to having those similar feelings of discomfort when I see it. However, I should point out a few things about this, which is the way that Varda herself describes it. Or let me just take a step back and say that the film, I would suggest, for the most part, does not seem necessarily to cast any kind of overarching sense of moralizing against the characters, but rather it lets the world of the film do the moralizing and chastising of this particular set of circumstances itself. In other words, it leaves it up to the world of the film in order to see to it that various points are made as far as the inappropriateness of this particular situation and the various moralizing that occurs as the plot progresses. And so the film does that to a certain degree. Now, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that while there are still very, I think, even on these terms, quite very perplexing turns that this film takes when depicts certain characters in certain situations in the context of the plot. If we take a step back and we remember, for example, something that Agnès Varda says in her introduction to this film, which is part of the supplements, which is part of the package, she says something that, and I'll paraphrase, which is, in her films like this, she tries to, or I'm sorry, in the film with respect to her comments on AGNES V par Agnès V, excuse me, she makes the point about how she wants to use fiction in order to get at some kind of truth about a person or a character. I think this comment is very, very profound. It is profound because I think it's very consistent with how to view Agnès Varda's films up to now. Also, it is very profound in that it helps me to try to get some kind of appreciation with respect to the film Kung Fu Master, which, as I say, is very challenging and perhaps to some quite problematic. Now, what do I mean by this? It is obvious that this is a film. This is a narrative. It is obvious. It is obvious by the fact that these are characters that aren't themselves. These are very famous people, but they aren't playing people who are named them, and they are, while perhaps in situations in terms of familial dynamics, not completely foreign to their own personal lives, this story is still obviously a fiction, and it is made even more obvious by the fact that AGNES V par Agnès V, the other film, makes point of this. It is a fiction story. So I think we can try to understand the film on those terms. Then, if we look at the film Kung Fu Master as a means by which we have the appearances of the real-life children of Jane Birkin and Agnès Varda playing parts in the film, then, and I think Agnès Varda makes note of this really nicely, this is almost like a photo album of sorts, a family album, seeing these kids at this particular age playing in this film. This becomes, for Varda, and perhaps for Jane Birkin as well, almost akin to, say, looking back on a photo album from years past. So in that way, it is capturing a kind of moment. So fiction used to capture a sense of truth, in a manner of speaking. Also, along those lines, again, it is, of course, very difficult and perhaps very disturbing subject matter as far as the plot is concerned. But the way in which the plot develops leads to some very interesting conversations and discussions that are had between the mother character and the daughter character. And we see in those conversations how their own relationship, how their own dynamic seems to be changing or evolving to the point where we get a sense of maybe empathy between the two, which I think is very crucial in terms of establishing a real, true, honest, and earnest emotional connection, even between close familials like mother and daughter. And so it's an interesting way in which, therefore, the plot involving the main element of the plot, therefore, is used or relied upon or otherwise made comparisons with the relationship between mother and daughter. And so it gives rise to an examination of mother-daughter dynamics and how these can be affected or changed or evolved given a certain set of circumstances, which I think is made even more powerful by the fact that the mother and the daughter roles are played by real-life mother and daughter, so Charlotte Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin. So this is, I think, a very, very profound type of parallel that the film is using. Again, using the obvious fiction of the plot in order to try to get at some kind of truth. And I would argue that this avenue of truth is maybe an exploration of the dynamics between a mother and her child, her daughter, which is a very important relationship. We know it's a very important relationship for Jane Birkin, and so to see it played out like this, I think, is very interesting. And we also should say that this is, as I say, it is a film that is depicting something that maybe it makes us feel uneasy. It makes us feel like this is something that is not right. And to have those feelings, I think, is very natural. Of course, I don't want to make any excuses for this, but we do see, of course, in other films, not just films by Agnès Varda, but in many types of films, we usually see characters, or not usually, but it is not uncommon for us to see characters that are maybe engaged in some kind of activity or acts that may not be legal or moral, committing crimes or criminals or gangsters or that sort of thing as an example of that. But that's not to say that everything is all the same, and that's not to say that this equals that or that equals the other. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that cinema is a mode by which we examine various aspects of culture and viewpoint and perspective. And one of the ways I think that is common for that kind of understanding to emerge in cinema is to depict characters that seem to be doing something that is against societal norms or something. Now, to the degree to which those acts are against societal norms, I think that is up to us as individuals when we watch a specific film to make judgments on as viewers, and we are, I think, within our rights to do so as the viewer of the film. And so in that regard, I think if anyone watches this film and feels uncomfortable to the point of not liking it, that's, I think, a perfectly fine and reasonable reaction to have. And I admit, too, that for me, this is a very difficult film. It is a very difficult film, but trying to see specific aspects while still maybe feeling, acknowledging these feelings of discomfort that I have with respect to specific plot points, still trying to see how this can be operating in a world of the cinema of Agnès Varda, where, as I say, fiction is used as a means of trying to get at some kind of other truth. And in those terms, I think, one can approach this film, Kung Fu Master, even despite how one might feel about the plot. So, in that way, I think we have it here again as a kind of an essential companion, if you will, to J'aime bien par Agnès V, and vice versa. So we have the films here in this Program 9 disc, Jane B or Jane Bay. And then to continue with this film and the supplements that are included, we have an introduction from Agnès Varda herself from 2012, approximately 2 minutes. And then then she gives us her brief, yet I think very pointed assessment of of her general approach to this film. And then we get another supplement, which is from 1988 from Swiss television, Bonsoir, approximately 17 minutes, where we see Agnès Varda and Jane Birkin as guests. They don't speak wholly and exclusively about Kung Fu Master per se, but they talk about their general working relationship and also personal friendship, and also their work on not just Kung Fu Master, but also J'aime bien par Agnès V. So it's almost like a double bill of sorts that they are talking about with respect to their working relationship and their relationship vis-a-vis each other. So I think it's a really nice interview. It's great to see the lovely rapport that is had between the two of them. Again, Bonsoir from 1988. So with that, my friends, this is Program 9, Jane B, J'aime bien. And I think we can see that these are, in essence, very, they can be said to be thought-provoking, challenging, difficult, extremely difficult, given certain circumstances. And so they might not necessarily be for everyone, and that is okay. That is absolutely okay. But as far as the kind of approach that I think is at play here, I think they do serve a very important function, potentially so anyway, for anyone who is continuing on in a journey of the works of Agnès Varda for the reasons that I tried to cite. Again, if you want more insight than I am able to give, because I admit my comments are not so good and they're quite shallow, then I urge you to try to explore them in the context of this great set, The Complete Films of Agnès Varda. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.